all working to the same sheet of music. It's like a chorus in that sense. But really, it's a higher level directional planning tool serving to support a clear mission, and move a clear, deliberate vision forward. And this deliberate word is there deliberately because that's something that this vision part is clearly the board's job. It doesn't mean it doesn't come uninformed or with the partnership of your executive and staff, but it means that the burden of it or the opportunity of it lies with you. That's part of representing the public in doing so. It can become the guiding articulation of vision. To this vision, we, the team, become dedicated. So you can see how it sets the vector for how we're going to do work. The development of this higher visionary guiding enduring roadmap is a team effort. That's true. Everyone should participate. It can be inclusionary. However, the burden of it and having that vision and being able to set it and make it clear and assure that everyone is on the same vector is responsibility is yours. Many approaches and models, it's not a master plan, and I know some of you have seen infrastructure master plans or master plan communities or on and on and on of master plan. It's not exactly that. Usually a master plan will be subservient to the strategic plan, which is the larger guiding document that might say, hey, we need a master plan. We need a capital improvement program. We need an infrastructure plan. If we're a fire agency, you need a standards of cover model. You need a needs assessment. So all of those things kind of work within they're part of the strategy. So it doesn't deal with future decisions, it deals with the futurity of today's decisions. Are today's decisions putting us on a vector that will lead us to the vision? It's too bad how ambiguous these terms can be. Because you just go down the street to one other public agency and all these terms are used differently. It's really not rocket science. It really should be relatively straightforward to understand how they all link together. But sometimes without that linkage, it can be very confusing. How confusing it can be is similar to how confusing it is when you sit in a new position and you hear all these acronyms used and you have no idea what they mean. And at some point in time in there, you're just gonna have to raise your hand and say, I'm sorry, you're losing me with that one. I just don't know what all these things mean. You haven't explained it to me. That's why these kinds of things should not go untethered. They should not just stand on their own. They do in most cases, but they should be linked to a greater deliberate vector or vision that the board sets. So you can see how the strategic plan takes mission and moves it forward, the vision. And then all these things, you can have strategy in each of these areas. In personnel, in organizational health, in programs, in finances, in public relations, in facilities. And all these other things kind of are part of the strategy that moves the vision forward of the board. So strategic thinking is necessarily applied here. It has strategic plan benefits, obviously, from strategic thinking. Always begins with a question, what needs strategy? And that's a good question because you expect as a board for Phil to have a plan for different things, whether it be the facilities or the equipment or the money in some cases or the personnel. But the plans should be linked together in lockstep with a particular vision. So the agency exists, why the public money? The mission then is what it needs strategy. Thus it's strategic thinking. And again, I maintain that it's the board's job to represent the public while the district is strategically thinking on what's going to help position them best in the future. So in order to, you must begin with the mission statement. It always gets back to the mission, and we've talked about this. You confirm it, you analyze it, you identify, you consider the future, and leverage future opportunities. You mitigate risk, you guard against threats, you create strategic tactics or goals that must be supported in answering the question why about each of these. And then the leadership team gets serious about these things. Because then you know, okay, we're heading in this vector. And without that clarity, it's difficult at times for staff to understand whether they're on the right vector, whether they're in the same lane as the decision makers, as the representatives of the public. And so speaking clearly about your vision serves a great role in being able to optimize the way we do our work here or any other place. Now, there are challenges to doing it. Public agencies have special needs, they really do, and then challenges. The whole board to manager public relations relationships piece. Private sector doesn't have this to deal with. Public agencies have the opportunity to deal with the boards and the board understanding its role, and then coming down to the executive and making sure that interface is well done. Economic growth or stagnation. We all have, it's still raw, the recession. And we know that it seems as though it could happen again sometime. We don't know. And so that's a special challenge. Not everybody's got that challenge. The aging, shifting workforce. And you're probably not alone if your workforce is aging and you have a retirement wave going to be happening here reasonably quick, unless it's already happening. Evolving regulations. Nobody knows it like mosquito vector control agencies, the evolving regulations of what you can and can't do. There are lots of people thinking about what you can and can't do. And that means there's an evolution of regulations, most of which have basis now. I mean, there are times when you say, another unfunded mandate, but you got to take care of those things. I mean, when does a regulation come down that you say, nah, we don't think we're going to, yeah, maybe. Working with boards is a challenge because it's a collective, it's a team, it's an arrangement, it's all those things, and it changes. It's got life to it. It doesn't stay the same. It's not stagnant. And although any kind of changes that happens in boards can create opportunity or challenge, just like anything else. Then state budget issues, takes, requirements. There's just a lot of things that public agencies are challenged with that others aren't. The usual, can a strategic plan show value, be useful, and practical? Well, a practical planning moves an agency to action, the right actions. And it gets back to this vector that you set by creating this vision. By creating the vision, that vector means that everything that the agency does basically gets weighed and gets the formula of that vector, of that slope, gets worked into the way we work, the kinds of things we'll accomplish, the kinds of things we'll try to attempt. The value creates an easy action plan for a reasonable time frame, meaning that you don't plan for 40 years out, because really after 5 years out, it's hard to see with any degree of clarity in some respects. And an action plan means that a strategic plan ought to have an action plan that's readable, that's not so difficult to follow that you can't follow the linkage of goals and objectives all the way up to mission and vision. It becomes, and this goes back to that policy, that legacy of leaving a district better than you found it, is this becomes the way, the culture, the way that we plan here. And that becomes a very difficult thing for it actually becomes a challenge for new directors or new trustees to put a refinement on it rather than take away from it. Usually it gets added to and becomes even more important. It becomes even better as time goes on because we've got a way that we plan here. It demonstrates linkage between everything the agency does and the mission and vision, and then practical because it simply becomes a valued document, one that never gathers dust, using my story of the Tracy 2020 plan. Many of those things, by the way, did get done. It's just that the council didn't know it. Oh, this came from that planning effort back in 1987? Didn't know that. Good job in 1987. So the linkage, then the communication element fell apart. So the staff, the city manager and staff were working to that document, but they weren't reporting that the accomplishments that they were achieving were linked to this huge public issue, this public process that we had. And so it became, and I'm going way back to when I first got on the council in 1992, I was asking these questions. So 87 wasn't that far in the rearview mirror, but there was so much attention and time put into that. We needed to know that the council needed to know that these were useful or these were not, and why not. And that wasn't happening, so we were able to make that happen. So it became a valued document, and we were able to show that we made progress in the city of Tracy because of that effort that the public and so many others put into it. So the benefits, and a lot of people ask, why bother? Well, first of all, it promotes good governance principles, meaning that you're doing your job by setting the direction, looking out in the future, being the policy-making body that looks out and advances and protects the mission. Staff then is required to say, okay, we see where you want to go. Here's what it'll take to get you there. Let's get our heads together and make sure we're doing the right things. But everybody understands how all this is linked up. It's also the right thing for a whole team to do. In other words, everyone's got a part to play. It provides clarity. That word, I know I've said it over and over during these sessions, but clarity is a great prize. If everyone can have clarity, think of that. If everyone can have clarity, a future direction, what a great thing that can be. I think it's the most important word in management, because it tells the story of good communication when everyone's clear. And Mr. President, I remember when I said to you, and her when he was here, I said, you make sure that we don't leave any decision ambiguous. Make sure that before we leave agenda item number 5, that we're clear on what just happened before we go to agenda item number 6. Be sure that you understand what an employee does before you ding them in their performance evaluation for something they didn't even know they're responsible for. It's that clarity of so many areas. This is the one that links to clarity of future for this district or for any other agency for that matter. Being able to speak clearly and articulate and understand, clarity for all. It's such a great, it's such an important concept. It provides clear purpose, forces higher purpose planning, becomes the enduring planning tool for the agency, and provides an opportunity for common ground. It considers strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, as so many of you have done before, in a planned, deliberate way. And so it gives you all these things. There are lots of benefits to a strategic plan. There are many choices. The factors can vary the approach. In other words, the kinds of environment that you're in, the kinds of things you know that you're facing can make the approach to strategic plan different. What is the intention of it? What's happening around us? What's the term of the plan? Is it 5, 20, 2 years, whatever it might be? Specific organizational issues that need attention. Distinct need for clarity and linkage, demonstration of good planning to others that are around you that may have an effect over how this agency can or cannot do its job. But it's a reasonable expectation of the public to ask, what's the plan for this district? What's the outlook? Where are you going? What's going to be necessary? And for you to be able to have the strategic plan and say, here's what we plan to do. It's a reasonable expectation of the public to think that collectively you're all planning together. And it's articulated in a particular way. That's what a strategic plan gives you. It's reasonable for LAFCO to ask that. It's reasonable for a county board of supervisors to ask that. It's reasonable for your parent agencies, those that appoint you. Are you people planning there, and where's your evidence of it? It's an enduring expression of good governance. And then there's lots of different ways. There's a vision-oriented conceptual strategic plan, intentional strategic plan, risk-based, scenario-driven plan, action-oriented plan. And this is where it gets a little confusing because there are so many different approaches, so many different ways to slice the future and articulate to what degree of detail it has a lot to do with these. A vision-oriented plan basically says, here's our vision. Our vision is this. We intend on moving in that direction at some rate of speed. Conceptual plan has concepts that would support that vision. Intentional plan says there's some problem herein that we've got to work. It's a very intentional plan. We're doing this to be able to advertise to the world and everybody that we've got our act together. We're doing this because we've got a particular problem with our employees right now. And it's an intentional plan that helps move that along, whatever it might be. A risk-based plan means that we've done a risk assessment, and based on that risk assessment, we have scenarios that are generated that help mitigate or articulate how we plan on mitigating those risks. And an action-oriented plan just is a broader kind of document that looks at all elements of what an agency does and creates some future plan for each one of those elements. And I guess I just explained that. A risk-based plan, yeah. A risk-based plan is really an interesting one. And some agencies do a risk-based plan because they just feel like they're on the cusp of something unfortunate. And I know a lot of sanitary sewer agencies, a lot of those that have aging infrastructure are oftentimes doing risk-based strategic planning. There's an action-oriented plan then is directional, foundational in terms of articulating the purpose and vision. It's the broader, more umbrella way of doing it. Carefully linked strategic actions stemming from the challenges of a vision. Intentionally working on things together. So it's really kind of insistent, this type of plan is kind of insistent on everyone playing their roles and everyone taking the role very seriously and moving their parts ahead. So it creates a clear path, a planning tool, our telescope roadmap, the way we plan here. It establishes a directional trend. It's a great first strategic plan because it's by its nature comprehensive. It kind of requires you to look at every aspect of what you're doing and determine whether or not there's some deliberate planning necessary over a reasonable time frame. And here we are. You've seen this a number of times, but this up here, this value-driven board, that's you. You're the ones that are caring about, based on your beliefs and vision and priorities and policies, the what, the ends. Down here, the how, the means. So this is everybody playing their role. The governance team up here being value-driven, the administration and staff down here being skill-driven, working together to do a strategic plan. And so it's a really great tool to be able to, again, move you forward in a very deliberate way. So the attributes of a strategic planning process, I think I've covered those. You have to ask yourself if these things are necessary. The one of the question points on a strategic plan is how inclusive do you want to be? And you know, inclusivity can say, who do we need to include? For instance, with the Tracy 2020 plan, it was y'all come to several charrettes, we're gonna get together, we're gonna sit at round tables, we're going to put stickies on the wall, we're gonna do the whole, and it went on for really about a year and a half. That's a very inclusional plan. And so when I got to the council, I said, golly, that's gotta be here somewhere. It's got to be somewhere in these agenda items that there's some linkage, see. And so The nice thing about it is that we finally found it, and we finally worked out how that was going to work. But that collective, commissioned by a collective leadership, showing then that linkage down to mission, that the actions to mission, all the way from the way that we're spending money on actions, and you can trace that all the way up to the mission. And there's some detail level of, the amount of detail in my mind, and I think I've got a little chart in here that shows how I think that you can go overboard with the amount of detail. You can go overboard with the amount of inclusivity as well. But generally, you have some public meetings, you have some meetings with your employees, everyone who's got an opinion gets an opportunity to express, and then the board takes that and uses that and moving forward as a planning tool, as a plan to support the planning effort. So here's that mission statement, vision, core values, strategic elements, which are all those, everything that's within a particular agency, goals and actions below, creates a 5-year, and then annual planning maintenance. This gives you an opportunity every year then to refresh it, to make sure that we're on track with it, to keep or toss elements of it that may or may not be necessary any longer. But it needs to be practical. Board members, even a brand new board member, should be able to be handed a strategic plan, and you ought to be, whoever's doing this new board orientation, new member orientation, should be able to lead them right through from mission down to vision to the elements of the plan down to action. And then every year, if you're looking at it, if you're managing the plan, they get an opportunity to express about the plan too, if something might be missing or something might be necessary. Did the content linkage already. So, inclusivity, we talked a little bit about this already, but at times it's the only way to achieve what needs to be achieved. There's those that have an opinion, those that have a stake in this agency and its future should be able to express. And so you ought to at least allow them the opportunity to address and express the board relative to the future of the agency. Because if you're really going to take the time to do a strategic plan, then the assumption is you're going to take time to live by that strategic plan, and then there's reason for those that have a stake in the agency, like the employees, like the neighbors, like those in differing parent agencies that have appointed you. But it's usually working on issues relating to the stakeholder involved, and that's okay. You want that broad perspective going into a plan. So any agency needs to ask themselves who and how. So this is even before you have one meeting on it, or other than approving, moving forward in a strategic plan, is you have to ask yourself who should be involved. And does it really need to include everyone? Should it really? And it depends on your situation, of course, and your community, and in some cases, your service. So gathering input then from staff, from employees, from public, from partner agencies, and then in preparation for a workshop. Then the mission statement, we've certainly been over that, but this is the drive engine. It must be right, and it only rarely changes, and we've talked about mission a lot during these courses. Vision, however, we haven't talked about as much, but what would we like to say about whatever agency in 5 years is the question, or however long you decide a plan should be. What would we like to be able to say? And that instantly becomes a gap that you need to fill in some way. And so that gap creates that drive to strategic thinking. Then the vision drives the mission forward. It also implies and demands strategy. So the vision is a key element of any planning, obviously. It's the fertile ground for differing perspectives as well. It's positive change, a new direction, a real commitment. It drives action. That's what a vision does. It drives action. So here's just some vision that some people have put together. And you guys have worked on your vision, but note, let's see. See, a vision always says we will be regarded, will strive. They wanted, this Park District, they wanted to be recognized as a local leader, which implied that they weren't. And they were willing to say, we're not so sure that we're the local leader in Parks and Rec, but we want to be. And so that was the vision statement that set the vector for them. And staff, it's a fertile ground for staff to think, man, what's it going to take to really do that? And I've got the endorsement of my board to move that forward, to move in that certain direction. So vision always creates that forward-thinking gap that we get to work on and make real. So one good test of a strategic plan is, can it clearly articulate where you're headed? Again, a vision. Can it show regulators, the public, other agencies, current employees, new board members that you mean business and you've carefully thought out the future? It's really evidence of that. And just a reminder on linkage. So strategic elements are basically in an action plan, are basically the first one, remember action-oriented strategic plan usually is the best first one, and it needs to be comprehensive. You need to be able to show that you've thought about everything that the agency does, and those are usually binned in different departments and things like that. But you can't leave out things like the administration or the employees or the organization, which unfortunately oftentimes gets left out of strategic plans. It's all about the infrastructure, it's all about the equipment, it's all about the facilities. And that's just a specific plan for a particular area. A good action-oriented plan should have all of this inclusive, and you should be able to demonstrate that you've thought about those elements. So here was what I was kind of going about. There's regulatory compliance, there's natural resources management for this particular district, there's infrastructure management, and you can see that there are strategic goals there, and here's the key. Here's the thing that makes it useful for a board, is that it says we plan on getting it done by then. That changes everything. See, if you leave off this column, then really you've just kind of got a conceptual plan. Someday we're going to get there. But as soon as you together create this column, then it says we're not just going to get there someday, we're going to get there by 2022. My goodness, my mind went all the way back to 2014. I was going to say 2014. That's in the rearview mirror, but it's how quickly time goes by. But you can see how this column changes things and makes it real, makes it accountable. And that's a big word in this, is that we didn't just throw these out there by guess. This column requires that we prioritize. It requires that we support. It requires that we are actually have a reality behind it and support the resources necessary to achieve something. Too many strategic plans don't have that. And yes, I know a lot of staffers, a lot of managers aren't real crazy about that column. But board members are, because board members need to have this accountability thing. It gives you an opportunity. The other thing a strategic plan can be very useful for, and I think Phil will agree with me, is this becomes his challenge on a yearly basis for the opportunity of his good board to do a proper performance evaluation every year. If things are not, if we're not going to make these dates, then tell us. Let's talk about it. What got in the way? What's before it? How managing this list of things that are necessary to do to support, as strategy to support a vision is something we all arrived at together and will manage together. So using it then this is where the Tracy 2020 plan fell short, is that it wasn't integrated to things that I could find. It didn't link actions and projects and initiatives to its strategic plan. Doesn't mean it wasn't getting done, it's just that we didn't know it. Using the strategic plan to do budget forecasting, use it in your capital plan, link it to your CIP if you have one, make it part of your agenda items. So now, if you look at the agenda for the Tracy City Council, there's a piece in there that says, how does this item relate or not to the strategic plan? And if it doesn't, should it? And if it does, here's where we're at. And that may or may not need to change based on the way things work out. You lose your sales and property tax within 2 months. It gets cut 30% or something like that. And then redevelopment goes away a year and a half later, and you wonder how is that going to change your strategic plan? Absolutely. And so things happen. Stuff happens. But if you manage it annually, what really got done, what's no longer viable, what may be needed now, what things happened that should change our strategy, what new things need to be planned out into the future. And this is where new board members come in. They bring a fresh perspective, a new look, a new thought, a new idea. And so maintaining your plan, especially annually if you can, is certainly a best practice. And this is just one opportunity. The other opportunity, of course, as I said earlier, was in the evaluation of your executive, the one who actually proposed the third column. So you see, let me go back to it. You see, this column doesn't get proposed by you. These columns get proposed by you. We have vision relative to regulatory compliance. You, Phil, say, oh, well, we need to do these things then. Okay, Phil, tell us when you think you can get them done. Can we move that one up? Do we need to have that one right away? Gee, it would really be a value to the board to be able to have accomplished this year instead of next year. So it's almost a negotiated between you all. And the outcome, though, is a collective statement of what's going to happen where. So the process is relatively straightforward. There's an outline. You gather input. Like I said, is it inclusionary? How inclusionary are you going to be? You do a board workshop. You write a draft document. And basically, staff takes away your vision and your direction out of this workshop and does a preliminary, what's it going to take us to get there? We see where you want to go, board. Here's what we think it'll take to get you there. Then you come back and you check in with the board, do what I call a tone check. Then the document refinement, make tweaks to refine the document as necessary to reflect reality in some cases, to reflect circumstances that perhaps weren't anticipated. Then a board approval of the plan, and when you approve that plan, if there's any change in your mission, but your vision, that will be in there, a vision there, and then that's all done at a regular board meeting because you're changing some of the foundational things about your district, perhaps, or you're affirming them. Then you use and share your plan. It's on the website, it's on the counter, it's mailed to stakeholder, parent agencies, anyone that cares about your district can get one of your plan because you're proud of the fact that you put your collective heads together and looked out in the future and anticipated in every element of what you do what might be necessary to forward the mission, to protect and advance that mission. Then you annually manage it. So I've talked about revisiting the tool annually, show that it works, use it as a roadmap, integrate it to your agenda, promote it as your plan, distribute to agencies, refine the document. Then it's about providing the resources to support the plan. And this is where the rubber meets the road, really, is that, okay, we did a strategic plan in 2020, and now it's 2022, and in order to be able to get this thing done in 2024, we're going to need to start lining things up. Board, are you still with it? See, if this document has been sitting on the shelf for 2 years, because you did it in 2020, and 2 years later it comes up when you're needing to support it, that's not as good as being able to use it and keep it as part and make it part of the fabric of this agency. And so when an expenditure or a position comes forward that's in your strategic plan, it's not a surprise to anybody on the board. Instead, it's understood, oh, this supports number 2.3 in your strategic plan to be able to respond to and comply with regulations that are moving forward in this area, for instance. It provides policy guidance, overall, prove overall staffing if that were one of the challenges that was called out in your strategic plan, or rates or charges or fees or taxes or assessment. And keep your passions but stay together. This is one of the things, is that I've told you in earlier classes that this role as a board is to keep your passions but be able to work together and mix those passions in a functional way. This is one of those opportunities to do just that. So can you get your passion? Remember my softball analogy, when that was my deal. I wanted to have passion. If there was going to be passion, it's going to be in the area of softball, but I understood that the senior center was probably just as important to just as many people. Both of them got put into the Parks and Recreation strategy. And so when they came along, we were able to see it and support it and understand how the priorities worked out. So both Gretchen's and my passions were both there. We could see where they were. We talked about it, and now we had an understanding. We stayed together during it. Because if you start fighting there, then things start coming apart. Then it goes, if any of you ride motorcycles, then this high-speed wobble starts. Bad thing. Because staff is saying, uh-oh, what's happening to this? So if you're going to say it, then support it. And if you're going to be able to support it year after year, you're going to have to share it. And it's going to have to be something that is really part of what you do, so that everyone's passions can be heard and you can stay together and understand if it does or doesn't, as a body, stay within that plan. Then engage with the wider community. Remember that this enterprise belongs to the public. Understand the public needs and wants, and understanding that the future is not meeting understand where the district is not meeting public needs, and so then you can reflect that with different things that are going on or different plans that you have. Communicate what you're doing to meet those needs and progress and the progress you're making or not, and then make an effort to understand those you know may or may not agree with or may not like. That's where the key of a plan is. It puts things on the table for discussion. It's always there for us to be able to express about and be able to monitor and even change if necessary. It's still, but the one thing you have to say about California, as he pointed out, is that over the last few years, I've really tried, last 15, 20 years, really tried to dial it down, at least in terms of replicated policies or mandated transparency, putting your budget on the website, having a website. That doesn't mean there aren't some districts up in Alturas that have just like these guys. You hope that the directors of that little water district out way up north or way out in the desert are as vigilant as those two guys. Because when somebody comes calling and counting on, even he had to admit, you have to admire their attention to detail, their heartfelt caring about the rules. And one thing that California has done since the Little Hoover Commission and since a number of other legislative kind of oversight kinds of things is that for the most part, when they came looking into special districts, they found the right intention, the right service, the right rate for the right purpose. For the most part, they're going to find some. There are nearly 3,300 special districts in California. And there are about 1,200 of them that belong to CSDA, and there are about 600 of those that really participate. And so there's a lot of work to do out there just in California. And he pointed out Idaho and Kentucky and Texas and Colorado, all of them have special districts. And so in some respects, he's right. But look, it's entertainment. He wants to get a laugh. And there's plenty to laugh about. But there's also plenty to be serious about. And there's nothing closer to the public than their local government. That's why we do things like District of Distinction. That's why we do things like transparency certificates. To be able to say, provide evidence that you all or those two or whomever else is trying to do the right thing for the public for that reason over there, for the mission. And so, yeah, it is kind of, he did make me laugh. But at the same time, he made me cringe, because those of us that are in local government understand local government. One thing he doesn't understand is how important local government is to the people of America that can access their decision makers, that can have a say, that can get up there every meeting and have the opportunity to address. That's just not typical anywhere else. Yep.
Brent, again, compensation for board members. Our district has people from Sausalito to Cloverdale to Point Reyes. I mean, and they get the same compensation as somebody that's 4 miles away from here. Which, there's something wrong. We said mosquito dish are controlled by a separate governance on those. We can't change the compensation. That's told.
That's probably in the charter language. Yeah, I think we've got probably the amplification off a little bit. But yeah, there are some stopgap kind of regulations that don't let that kind of thing be recognized and appropriately dealt with. Other agencies are in other parts of the charter or of the code sections don't have some of those restrictions, and they do take care of their directors in a different way. But yeah, that can be an issue. But there's not any of us. I suppose the association, your association, could take that up with in terms of legislation. Although I kind of think they've got other fish to fry. So, monitoring and evaluating and revise for accountability. We're almost done here, guys. Finding the right degree of monitoring is difficult. In other words, how much do I, as a board member, get in and monitor? And this is why things like policy and procedure are so important, and a plan is so important, is because it gives you the right amount of accountability to feel like you're doing the right amount of oversight or monitoring, but not getting so far down the weeds that it's impossible for Phil to make everybody happy. And so it's really is that interesting interface of trying not to micromanage, but still feeling like you've got enough handle on what's going on here to be able to monitor appropriately. But it really gets down to too little, the board loses accountability. Too much, you get accused of micromanagement. It is one of those, fringe issues and gray matter that really can become difficult. But the board should focus on results, not how things are done. And that's a hard thing at times. You know, what are the results and achievements that you expect to take place here? And that, again, goes back to a strategic plan where it's clear what kinds of goals and achievements are necessary. So examples of what to monitor are obvious. Financial monitoring, and you have policies on reserves, how much, what type, audits, financial trends, overall budget pay-go versus debt, those kinds of things. You have plenty of policy and monitoring responsibility and authority to get in there and make sure that you're doing your fiducial responsibility. And then monitoring the performance of the CEO or of the general manager, which is the chief executive of most every agency, and with a plan, priorities, and goals. Again, that harkens back to the strategic plan. Reviewing progress toward mission or goals and objectives, ensuring meeting legal requirements, of course. Periodic evaluation of the personnel asset. That's the one that can get dicey, is how much should a board member monitor what's happening in the personnel side of the organization. You know, every agency has 4 kind of assets that the public is given. It's got money, it's got equipment, it's got facilities, and it's got people, all of which are public asset, all of which are a public investment. And so your job, if in terms of monitoring and accountability, say, how do I deal with finances, where you have lots of policies and you have lots of different controls and you have different kinds of things that make you feel comfortable with finances and with the money. Then there's the equipment, and you have equipment replacement policies. You have different kinds of things that you can do. Then there's the facilities. You do what you need to do, or you don't, you put that off. But when it comes to the people asset, when it comes to the human capital, it can become really difficult because of how close sometimes we get to the people that work here. And there is if that ever is, when it becomes necessary, when it becomes important, is almost every time Phil gives you a report on what's going on, what's happening in the employee base, what's happening with the human capital unit. And it is something that a board should expect to be made comfortable with, that your executive is optimizing all of those assets, including the personnel asset. And evidence of that is really on the executive to be able to provide you with that public investment is also optimized, and this is how. These are the kinds of steps we're taking. These are the kinds of things we're doing to assure that your personnel asset is well managed. And then a real interesting step is being self-critical, or conduct a periodic self-assessment of your own performance as a board. And there are a number of agencies that do that. Their boards do a board self-assessment, and then they talk about the places they rated themselves lowest. I just did one of those on Monday. It's always interesting. It always comes up with great introspective thoughts about one another and what they say and do and how they say and do it. But it really does provide an opportunity to talk about your own performance, because you're part of the team too. So, here's a summary. The principles of accountable governance. The board governs on behalf of the owners, all of the owners. The board is the highest authority of the district, below only the owners. The board is the initial authority in the district. Board is the accountable for everything about the district. All authority and accountability is vested in the board as a group. Governance roles and executive roles have different purposes. Delegation to the manager should be maximized, short of risking the board's fulfillment of its accountability. And assessing the board performance requires evaluation of both governance and management for the manager. As a wrap up for the whole 6 hours you've put up with me and my technical glitches, I want to thank you for caring so much about good governance. Because if he knew you, he couldn't say that, some of those things. he's looking from the bottom up and ranking those that may, actually he's challenging the public to know more about their government. And the local most accessible area of government is their special district and their local government. Thank you for that. Thank you for the time you've spent with me. I hope you've learned a few things that you can take away and use not only here, but maybe in your parent agencies. And if there's any questions, I'd certainly be glad to take them. But now you have done you can check the 6-hour box of training for your District of Distinction, and congratulations. Thanks.